Today we're talking about solving multi-step equations with variables on both sides, where the only thing that we're focusing on is moving the variable. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is an essential question. Our essential question is, how do we solve multi-step equations with variables on both sides using DC-MAM? So DC-MAM is a method in order to help us organize kind of like the steps that we need to take in order to solve linear equations. As we progress through this unit, questions will get more and more difficult. For some students, it might be hard to know where to start, where to go next, and so on. So DC-MAM is just a tool that we use to kind of like, it's a step-by-step checklist. At the end, you should have your answer. DC-MAM stands for distribute and or destroy denominator. The C stands for combine like terms. The M stands for move the smaller variable. The A stands for add or subtract. M stands for multiply or divide. In 7th grade, we learn about solving 2 steps, 1 steps, and even multi-step equations. But the variable is always on one side of the equal sign. So if I were to draw a wall for both of these, in 7th grade, our variable was always on one side. In 8th grade, the only difference is that the variable now is on both sides of the equal sign. So remember, in 7th grade, when you're solving an equation, the whole idea is to get x or whatever variable you're working with to equal a number. So for 7th grade, in order to solve this problem, if I want to isolate the variable x, what I need to do is do inverse operations. So in this problem, it's 6x or 6 times x plus 4 equals 10. So if I'm adding 4 to get rid of it, I need to do the inverse operation, so it'll be subtract 4. So I will subtract 4 on both sides, and then that forms a 0. So what I'm left with is that 6x, which drops down. 10 minus 4 is 6. And then the x is not isolated yet, so I need to go ahead and somehow move this 6 to the opposite side. So this means 6 times x. So in order to do the inverse, I need to divide by 6. That forms a 1. So I have x, and then 6 divided by 6 is 1. So that's my final answer. In 8th grade, very similar. The idea is to get x all by itself. The way that we're going to do that is I could either move this x to that side or this x to this side. Either way, I want to get x by itself. So either it could be x equals a number like this, or it could be x equals a number like this. Either way is acceptable. So the way that we do this is by using DC-MAM. So DC-MAM. So every problem, I'm going to use this method to help me solve these problems. So if I go through this checklist, that first letter D means for distribute and or destroy denominator. I don't see any parentheses, so that means I can't distribute, so I'm going to cross that out. Then the C stands for combine like terms. Most people tend to think, since there's 2 variables, that they could combine like terms, but they have to be on the same side of the equal sign, either on the left side together or on the right side together. But since in this problem, I cannot do that, I will just cross out the C, since I cannot combine like terms. Then I'm going to ask myself, can I move the smaller variable? Well, in this, I have 6x and 10x. The smaller one will be 6x, so I'll subtract 6x on both sides. And so when I do that, I have 6x minus 6x will be 0. So I'm left with 4. And then 10x minus 6x is 4x. Bring down to minus 3. Now, remember, my goal is to go ahead and solve for x and isolate x. Get x on one side. Since I just moved the smaller variable, I'm going to go ahead and cross that out. So now I'm asking myself, can I add or subtract? Well, in this problem, I have 4 equals 4 times x minus 3. So I'm subtracting 3. So I want to do the inverse. So the inverse of subtracting 3 would be to add 3 on both sides. and then these form a 0. So I'm left with 4x on the right side equals 4 plus 3 is 7. And then lastly, can I multiply or divide? Well, I have 4 times x, so the inverse would be to divide, but by 4 on both sides. So my final answer would be 7 over 4. Sometimes you get fractions as an answer, but you always want to simplify. I cannot simplify 7 and 4, so that'll be my final answer. So that's pretty much it for what we're doing today. Every other problem that we're looking at today, it's just different variations and different ways that you could be asked the problems. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Feel free to pause it at any time. All right, so example 1. So let's do this really quick. I'm going to draw my wall, write D, C, M, A, M on the side. As these problems get more difficult, this is going to be really useful to help you solve these. So first thing, can I distribute? I'm going to be like, no, because I don't see any parentheses, so I'm going to cross that out. Can I combine like terms? I cannot, because the variables are on opposite sides. Next, can I move the smaller variable? Well, I have a 3x and a 5x. Well, 3x is smaller than 5x, so I could move the 3x. But in order to move it, what I need to do is do the inverse of it. So that's positive 3x. So the opposite or inverse would be negative 3x, or subtracting 3x on both sides. So it's minus 3x. So these form a 0. So I'm left with negative 2 equals, well, 5x minus 3x. Well, 5 minus 3 is 2. Bring down to plus 3. So I just moved the small variable. Now, can I add or subtract? Well, if I look at this, I'm adding a 3. So the inverse is to subtract 3. So same process. This forms a 0. Drop down that 2x. Negative 2 minus 3. They're both on the same team. They're both on a negative team. If I look at this, they're both negative. Since they're both negative, it's like 2 players on the same team scoring points. So I'm going to add up their points. So 2 plus 3 is 5. But they're both negative, so it stays negative. And then lastly, can I multiply or divide? Well, if I look at this, I have 2 times x, so the inverse will be to divide by 2 on both sides. And so lastly, I have x equals negative 5 over 2. I cannot simplify that fraction. It's already in simplest form. I am done. Go ahead, try number 1. Make sure that you type in your answer correctly into the Google form, and then move on. All right, example 2. What is the value of x that satisfies the following equation? Same process, different numbers, but same process. So I'm going to write D, C, MAM on the side. Draw my wall. Same process every single time, no matter what question, no matter what we're doing. So I'm going to ask myself, can I distribute? Well, I don't see any parentheses, so I'm cross that out. Can I combine terms? Well, I see 2 variables, but they're on opposite sides. Cross that out. Can I move a smaller variable? So this is where it gets tricky. I have a negative 6x and a negative 8x. So the whole purpose of moving the smaller variable is so that you don't want to deal with negatives. Negatives make life a little bit more difficult. The way that we're going to identify which variable is smaller is we're going to use the number line. So I drew this number line really quick. I have negative 6x and negative 8x. So if I go to negative 6, it's right here. If I go to negative 8, it's right here. So the way that I'm going to identify which one is smaller is by choosing the one that's furthest to the left on the number line. Since negative 8 is furthest to the left, I'm going to move that variable. So in order to move it, I need to do the inverse. So negative 8x is really just adding 8x on both sides. So I'm going to add 8x on both sides. When I do that, I'm going to calculate. So So it's negative 6x plus 8x. You should get 2x. Bring down to minus 8. Negative 8x plus 8x, that forms a 0. That's the whole purpose of doing the inverse. Bring down that positive 6 on the right side. So I just moved the smaller variable. Next, can I add or subtract? Well, I have 2x minus 8 equals 6. So I'm subtracting 8. So I want to do the inverse, right? Remember, the whole goal is to get x equals a number at the very end. That's the whole goal of this, is to get x equals a number, get x isolated. So I need to get rid of that minus 8. So the way I do that is by adding 8 on both sides. So that forms a 0. So I'm left with that 2x. 6 plus 8 is 14. Lastly, can I multiply or divide? Well, it's 2 times x equals 14. So I need to do the inverse, and that's division. So I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides. So I'm left with x, and then 14 divided by 2 is 7. And that'll be my final answer. Just like that. Go ahead, try number 2. Make sure that you show your work. When you're done with that, type in your answer into the Google form and then move on to the next example. All right. The next one. Same process. Every single one of these questions, same process. There's different sets of numbers, different scenarios, but same process every single time. Write DC ma'am, draw your wall. Same process. Can I distribute? Well, I don't see parentheses, so I'm going to cross that out. Can I combine like terms? Well, I see 2 variables. Well, 2 are the same variable, but they're on opposite sides. So I cannot combine like terms. Next, can I move the smaller variable? Well, I have negative 8x, right? A negative 8x. Remember, the sign in front goes with the number, and positive 2x. That same idea. If I had that number line, right, I know that positive 2 is right there. Negative 8 is right here. So positive 2 right here, negative 8 right there. Which one is first to the left? Well, it'll be negative 8. So I'm going to move the negative 8 instead of the positive 2. So the inverse of subtracting 8x is to add 8x on both sides. So I'm going to do that. Negative 8x plus 8x forms a 0. So I'm left with that 50. 2x plus 8x is 10x. So I just moved a smaller variable. I'm asking myself, can I add or subtract? I'm not adding or subtracting in this problem. So I'm not going to do that step. Next step, can I multiply or divide? Well, in this problem, I have 50 equals 10 times x. So the inverse will be then to divide by 10 on both sides. So I have x equals 5 because 50 divided by 10 is 5. I reached the end of my checklist. I reached my goal. Remember, the whole goal is to get the variable all by itself. It doesn't matter if it's on the right side or on the left side. The whole idea, get the variable all by itself. Try the you try. Try the you try. Type in your answer into the Google form and then move on to the next example. All right, example 4. Same question. What is the value of x that satisfies the following equation? Same process, different numbers. DC, ma'am. Okay. So, draw my wall. Ask yourself, can you distribute? No, because we don't see parentheses. Next step, can I combine like terms? Well, I see 2 variables. 2 are the same variable, but they're on opposite sides. So I cannot combine like terms. Can I move the smaller variable? So I have 3x and negative 3x. If I were to look at the number line, same process. So if I look at negative 3 and positive 3, negative 3 is right there, positive 3 is right there. Negative 3 is to the left, so I'm going to move negative 3 instead of positive 3. So in order to move negative 3, I need to do the inverse operation, so that'll be add 3x to both sides. So when I add 3x to both sides, 3x plus 3x is 6x. Bring down the plus 1. These form a 0. I'm left with that 4. Next step. Can I add or subtract? Well, I have 6x plus 1 equals 4. The inverse of adding 1 will be to subtract 1. So I'll subtract 1 from both sides. These form a 0. So I'm left with 6x. 4 minus 1 is 3. Lastly, can I multiply or divide? Well, right here, it's 6 times x equals 3. So the inverse will be to divide by 6. So I have 6, or x equals 3 divided by 6. If you were to leave your answer like that, you would be incorrect. It is not in simplest terms or simplest form. You need to go ahead and reduce this fraction. So if I were to think of a number that goes into both 3 and 6, the biggest number that goes into both, it'll be 3. I know that 3 divided by 3 is 1. 6 divided by 3 is 2. My final answer would be 1/2. Try number 4. Once you're done, write your answer into the Google form for try number 4, and then move on to the next example. All right, example 5. What is value of x that satisfies the equation? So this is where it gets difficult. Now we're dealing with fractions. So we don't want to deal with fractions. So what we got to do is get rid of the fractions. So what we're really looking to get rid of is that denominator, the denominators. That's what I really want to get rid of. So remember, if I were to give you 1/2, or let's say 1/3, how can I turn that into 1 or into a whole number? Well, I know that if I multiply 3 with 1/3, these form a 1, and that would equal 1. If I were to give you 1/4, how can I turn that into 1? Well, I know that if I multiply 1/4 by 4, those form a 1, and I get 1. So if I continue that pattern of how 1/5, how can I turn 1/5 into 1? So how can I turn 1/5 into 1? The way we do that is by multiplying by 5, because these form a 1, and that's that. So if I follow that pattern, if I give you 1/2, how can I turn 1/2 into a whole number? Well, it's just multiply by the denominator. So notice that whatever we're dividing by, that's what we're going to multiply by. Whatever we're dividing by, that's what we're multiplying by. So on and so forth. So in this problem, I'm dividing by 2, so I'm going to multiply everything. Everything by 2. So it'll be 2 times this, 2 times that, 2 times this, 2 times that. So when I do that, these form a 1, so I'm left with that 1x. So I'm going to write 1x. And then if I do 2 times 2.5, if I multiply those two, when I work that out, you should get 5. And then same thing, 2 times 3 divided by 2. These two form a 1. So what I'm left with is that 3. So I'm going to write that 3x, right? Because it's that 3x that's left over. Then I'm bringing down that minus sign. And then I know that 2 times 3.5, 2 times 3.5 is really just a 7. Okay. What I forgot to mention was we use DC mam. So it was distribute and or destroy denominator. So what we just did was destroy the denominator. Now, can I combine like terms? Same process. I cannot because they're on opposite sides of the equal sign. Can I move the smaller variable? Well, I have 1x and 3x. So 1 is smaller than 3. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 1x from both sides. So I'm left with that 5. 3x minus 1x is 2x. Bring down the minus 7. Next, can I add or subtract? Well, I'm subtracting a 7 in this problem, so I want to do the inverse. That'll be adding 7. So that from the 0, so I'm left with 2x. 5 plus 7 is 12. Lastly, can I multiply or divide? Well, I'm multiplying by 2 because that's 2x. So I'm going to do the inverse, that's divide by 2. X equals 6. Make sure that you try the number 5. Make sure that you also submit your answers onto the Google form and hit submit and view your score. Whatever questions you got wrong, whether it was you try 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, make sure that you get those correct answers, that you get help. You raise your hand, ask me for help. I'll come by and help you out before you go on to IXL. Before you go on to IXL, make those corrections first before you go on to IXL. And that's it.